Our guest today is Dan Altom. He brings a unique edge to the show as he's the owner of a Sunbelt Business Brokers franchise and the owner of the Woodlands Young Learners Academy, which he scaled over the past 2 decades to 4 locations and a dedicated clinic. If you want to know how to find, vet, and acquire and scale a daycare, this is your guy.
And welcome to How I Bought This. Before I kind of dive into everything to learn more about your daycare and the Woodlands Young Learning Center, I want to know a little bit about your business brokering operations. So you own a Sunbelt Business Broker franchise in Texas. Can you tell me a little bit about what you do and who are the type of clients you work with there?
Sure. So it's the franchise, the Houston market franchise in Texas. We've got a team of 10 brokers. I'm actually the third owner of the franchise. We've been in Texas since 1996 or so. So been around for a long time. Got a really, really strong team. We kind of embrace our, small business, Main Street, mom and pop kind of businesses that we help our clients or the business owners are looking to exit. And we manage that process for them and kind of take them through the whole thing and make it just a wonderful exit process.
And then through your selling SMBs, is that how you came across the Woodlands Young Learning Center and acquired it, or was this before you acquired the franchise?
Gotcha. Yeah, no, actually flip-flop. I was in the financial world as a young man and ended up meeting a lady that became my business partner. And we started a preschool and then through the growth process, acquired several more operations through this Sunbelt office.
Nice. Yeah.
That's how I got to, what is it? I'm not just the president, I'm a client kind of thing. So, and that's how I got to know the Sunbelt team. And so as that business grew and scaled and kind of, I really did the thing where I worked myself out of a job, right? Where it got big enough to where all my roles were taken away and I was just kind of pestering people from lunch and happy hour. And so, the previous owner said, "Hey, come over here and partner up with me." And so I bought into the firm 19 and did that. So I've been around small business and small business transactions my whole life. My family was in the small business world space as well. So that's how the daycares kind of played into it and grew. And then I moved over to the business brokerage side.
Gotcha. So the timeline was first the daycare came first, and then through that you grew that and were able to become like an absentee owner type thing. And then you took on the Sunbelt franchise and started selling business that way. So even before the SMB M&A piece of where you're like work job now, you acquired a daycare.
That's right. Well, I've had kind of been at every seat of the table. I've been on the business buyer side and I've been on the business seller side now. Personally, I've done the whole SBA loan rigmarole a few times and on all the things. So which puts me in I think a really great spot to kind of know maybe the truth sometimes about what people are being told at different parts of the process.
Okay. So I want to dive in specifically to the daycare landscape here because it's getting a lot of, let's say, hype online. And you know better than anyone else, particularly about daycares in Texas. But why are daycares such a great business to acquire?
Sure. I mean, there's just a lot of they check a lot of boxes, right? In some ways, it's a low barrier to entry. You don't have to necessarily have some kind of insurmountable license or those kinds of things. There are those things, but they're not out of reach. And then I think the biggest thing that most people like is that recurring revenue. Kind of once you get your school going and have your brand and have those recurring customers with either more kids or the referrals and just have the machine working, it just is the same every month, which is fantastic. You're never going to hit a home run with daycare, in my opinion, but man, it's provided a wonderful life for me and my family just with the consistency and some of those kinds of things. So I think that's the biggest draw. And then there's just lots of opportunities with sizes and sizes of deals and what if those include real estate and those kinds of things to where it can be appealing to a lot of different types of buyers and still be daycare.
I think that it's a good point too, because it seems like there's quite a few different business models in the daycare space of real estate, no real estate, franchise, no franchise. Can you talk high level here and we can dive in a little bit, but what are the cost benefits to these different models here for daycares, or how should buyers be thinking about this?
Sure. And it kind of depends on why you're buying a daycare. If you love kids and you want to be around them and that's just kind of your calling and that's where you want to be, then maybe a non-franchise kind of strip center, small scale, jocker center is the way for you to go because you just love it. You want to buy yourself a job. Some of these guys that we've sold a number of locations to or facilities to, that's really what they're after. They want the daycare just to pay rent on this property and build equity that way. Care about the cash flow off of the business itself. They really just want in 10, 15 years to have this $2 million building that's been paid for by somebody else essentially.
Mm-hmm. And then You touched on it a little bit here too. Who are the players right now that are buying daycares? Is it private equity? Is it individuals? Who's buying daycares?
Right. So I mean, most of our transactions have been with other individuals for whatever reason. Either they're all the different reasons an individual financial buyer is looking to buy a business. But we are certainly seeing lots of private equity or private equity backed groups that are interested in rebranding private spaces, or they're okay if a franchise allows multiple brands, they're buying up those. So kind of all over the place. And I think it's just because you can build that portfolio of something that's can have some real consistency across, group to group to group without having to do a lot of culture shifting. There are huge culture issues at all preschools, right? But the systems and processes and things are kind of standardized.
So if I understand, kind of reiterate this, who's buying daycares? It really depends on the size and type of daycare. Smaller daycares, probably not. Maybe they're franchises, maybe they're not. These are individual buyers. And these buyers might be attracted to the cash flow, might not be, in the sense where they want to use that daycare to pay back the real estate loan. And then if you go up to larger daycares, private equity is dipping into it. And part of the reason why they like it is because of the recurring revenue of that
Hmm.
business.
Yeah.
For these buyers, do they need any sort of certification to own a daycare?
Sure. And I'll preface this with saying most of our work, or all of our work, and all of my experience has been in Texas. So, state to state with a lot of industries can be,
Yeah.
wild. But in Texas, you have to have your facility has to be licensed, and you have to have a licensed director, and then all your caregivers have to have a certain, standards and those kinds of things as well. And if you're serving food, you add on a whole nother, food service deal, and that depends on the county you're in. But at any rate, so yeah. But none of those are like, hey, go to school for, 18 years and get a super secret, designation kind of thing. If you have somebody with the background that's been in the business for a little while, and we've elevated a number of people through the process to get their director's certificate over a period of time, without having a college degree or anything like that, isn't necessarily required.
Let's look at your case here. When you bought the daycare, were you director certified, or did you obtain your license and then buy the daycare?
Gotcha. Yeah. So I did not personally have the background. My partner did. And so she was the educator and had a teaching background. And so she was the one that was going to, and we started a daycare first. So we just started from scratch, but we hired a director away from another school. And then as we've acquired other locations and started other locations, we kind of already had the pieces in place for how to grow people into being a director or an assistant director and obtain those licenses. For initially to start and to get our SBA loan, she had to have that license in place or ready to go when she had a facility address.
So if I wanted to buy a daycare right now, I would first have to become a director certified if I was just doing it by myself.
Yes. If you wanted to be a true owner operator, of course, I would always tell somebody just as a broker and in any situation that, hey, you don't want to be sole source there, right? So make sure that you have an assistant director that's qualified or be ready to step into that role. We like to do it where the directors that are our employees are kind of the name director, but then we're able to step in there if we needed to and be the director. But no, I think I had to work there for 2 years maybe before I had the experience requirements.
Yeah. So, I mean, this obviously depends on like county and state and all that jazz. Safe to say it takes a little bit of time to get that director license, and then you can like partner with people to use their director license, whether they're in staff or another owner to
Right.
acquire that. Okay.
Absolutely. Yep.
So part of what's happening right now, at least in my life, is all my friends have kids, and like there's this huge competition for them to get their kids in daycare, and their kids are, under 2. I think there is like a real thought to have here of, should I buy a daycare where I'm paying for the assets of the daycare plus goodwill, and then there's the purchase price, so it's that airball period, or should I just build a daycare? Because it seems like there's a huge demand for parents that are trying to put their kid in daycare, and it's really difficult. So you built your daycare and you've acquired daycares. How do you look at, should I buy a daycare or should I build a daycare?
Well, having been the acquirer of several ongoing operations and being a business broker, I'm always going to, default to buying ongoing operation.
Yeah, no, I understand.
I could see if there's a need for a preschool someplace, I could see where you would want to plant one. It's just a lot of work, My kind of shtick with the business buying thing is you're going to pay for it one way or the other. If you buy a business or start a business. So it just depends on the matter of when and how long a period of time and with what are you going to buy that in your time and sweat equity and loss runs and those kinds of things, or just get it going. So, in your case, if there's truly like a childcare desert, if you will, maybe you do need to start one. People don't realize, I think, they think that daycare, caregivers are underpaid, and they are, or low paid, and they are. And, when we serve, fish sticks and, what are all the things that say, hey, it's super cheap to have a daycare. look at this massive building you go into with all the, the footprint and the sets, whether you're a tenant or you built this place, there's a huge cost to that and carrying cost to that. So it's just one of those things where it's just between payroll and your occupancy costs, you eat up 70-80% of your revenue, like just in 2 line items, so, so so if you don't have a full enrollment, and we made the mistake of just thinking our spreadsheet on enrollment would match up with our teachers and everything would work out great. Well, it doesn't work that way because your ages of your kids determine your group sizes, which determine how many kids you can have in a room or with certain teachers. And suddenly our payroll got out of whack and we didn't have enough kids. And so that's just one of the headaches in any business of growing your business versus just buying something that you can improve upon or maximize or do those kinds of things. So that may be kind of a non-answer for you, but there's depends on maybe the circumstances. I think you should totally start a daycare though.
Maybe.
And we get a little bit of that here in Texas. Like for our schools, we tell people, hey, when you get pregnant, you need to come tell us that you're going to come to our school when your kid's 18 months old. And that's how big of a waiting list we have at some of our facilities, just because it's in such high demand and we have such a good product and those kinds of things.
Okay, so you've convinced me to buy a daycare. Now, if I were to buy a daycare, what should I look for in a healthy daycare, like revenue, salary discretionary earnings, or maybe there's other metrics you're tracking?
Sure. I mean, I would look at, utilization of, because daycares are licensed in the sense that they have a capacity number, right? And so you want to know kind of where you are in that realm. Pricing is one thing, but how many kids are you charging that? And then also there's a payer mix sometimes too. Some centers in the Houston area or in Texas get subsidized by, it used to be called, we still call it workforce solutions, but it's, or that's what it is now. And so there's just different payer mixes of how things go. Like we had a facility in a part of town that our model just wasn't successful at. And so we ended up selling it to a gentleman and he changed how he did everything different from us and started making money immediately. It was great. And the school filled up and it was wonderful for everybody, except for the misery we went through for a few years working on that.
I know what not to do.
Yeah. So, I would look at, the consistency, there's a big fluctuation, ask why. Sometimes it may be because at our centers, we actually go down in the summer because our families and the communities we're in, they travel and do those things. And so we lose that. Some centers, all your after school kids or your school age children, pile in and some, revenues can go up. So a little bit of his geography, and community centered. But I would look for just those, almost like with any business, right? You're looking for that consistent revenue and where it's coming from over a period of a long period of time, and then also that capacity utilization, just to just to see where you are and how much can I grow this business or what kind of profit margin is left. Because the way I look at it is the last, how much does one kid cost? Is for cost of goods. Well, the first one is $2 million a year, and all the rest of them are 100% profit. but at the end of the enrollment is where all that money just kind of drops to the bottom line, financially speaking. So if you've got if you're making money and you've got some enrollment space there, then that may be someplace where you can bring some skills to really maximize some profits there for you as the new owner.
So first, if I'm understanding this correct, when you're looking at a daycare to acquire, you should be looking at occupancy rate, see if there's room for growth, because if they're at 100% occupancy rate, other than increasing prices and decreasing costs is like tough levers to pull there. If you look at like pure metrics, is there some sort of like standard, I would say, buyers are looking for like SDE margin or maybe occupancy rate, or what are the key metrics?
Oh, gotcha. I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer that question very well for you, but there is some scale to it. On a small scale, there's scale.
Yeah.
If you have a small center that would be maybe under 100 kids or something like that, your profit margins are going to be pretty tight just because of that ratio. And I'm going to be pulling some numbers out of thin air here on this, but the bigger you get, the smaller that percentage of, like, say, payroll or something should be. Our centers are all around 200 kids, and I wouldn't say we're large, but we're kind of large, and I think that's a good spot to be in, unless you want to do the buy myself a job thing. If you want to get a center under 100 kids, like you're going to be, rolling your sleeves up and doing that, at least from a financial standpoint. Otherwise, you're not going to make any money, so it's got to be a bigger center to have the team in place to where you can either add that sales skill or the community, brand development, or, kind of whatever, or focus on buying more. You're maxed out on space and a bunch of other criteria, but if you want to add more kids, you got to add more square footage. So, you do that by planting another building. And
so, like, there's almost a synthetic cap that you have for, I don't want to say revenue, because you can always have that price lever, but occupancy.
To a degree, right? I mean, your community is only going to absorb so much price increase too.
And then, it's kind of similar to other businesses, I would say. Like, the larger businesses generally have healthier margins. Smaller businesses, they're smaller margins. But you said earlier, and just reiterating here, like your rent or mortgage payment and then your payroll are going to be your largest expenses
Yeah.
that you have.
And usually by far, right? Like, I mean, they'll stick out like sore thumbs, and everything else is just kind of like, how do we make sure and allocate enough money for, our next batch of crayons and that kind of fun stuff.
So are you acquiring a bunch of these Tesla robots to be your teachers?
It's a very high touch must be present to win business. That's for sure. So that makes your labor thing that's a whole other animal.
So for people who are buying daycares, I know for traditional businesses, there's generally a large airball in it because oftentimes real estate's not involved. So
Mhm.
they're using the SBA 7A loan program. For daycares, sometimes there's real estate involved.
Mhm.
So how are buyers buying daycares?
At least for us, from our experience, I think some buyers are extremely interested in the real estate. So they won't look at a deal, preschool deal, unless there is real estate. Some people are averse to the real estate. Whether it's there or not, they just want to be tenants because that's their business model, right? And I've seen that also at the different levels of buyers, from your big buyers that are doing roll-ups and down to your small buyers. So they all have kind of that their own personal metric of whatever. We always try to encourage our sellers to be as flexible as possible. That way we don't narrow our buyer pool. And that's how we approach it. And just be ready to address it from either they want the real estate or don't want the real estate. And so it's just going to depend on your buyer's buyer box on which way they go on that, right? A lot of deals you can use a 7A even with the real estate, right? So you don't have to necessarily worry about that. It's just the size of the deal, which also back to the buyer. Sometimes if they only have X amount of dollars for their equity injection, is along with any business, they may say, hey, I can only rent for 2 years, then we'll do an option to buy because then I can come back to the table after 2 years of seasoning this loan and do it again.
We see some industries where the 7A loan doesn't make up the lion's share of the acquisitions. There's the 504 loan that
Mhm.
potentially real estate daycares could qualify to if real estate's involved.
I'm a fan of the 504. We did one for one of our facilities. I thought it was great. They do those blended terms on the 7As now that kind of, the maths, kind of things.
Yeah, if it's a good deal, they're going to figure out a way to get it done.
Correct. And preschools are throwing off cash. It's just, they're just going to continue to do that, right? And the bank only cares about getting their loan payment made, right?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that banks really like with transactions that have real estate involved is there's collateral. Um,
Correct.
so you could even go the conventional route if the SBA doesn't meet your needs or what have you.
Here's
Uh,
a good story for you. We had one preschool that had really declined in enrollment, like down to just kind of nothing, right? And so the cash flow or the earnings, maybe they had a parentheses around them, was not going to support an ongoing execution, right? Well, the bank was able to recharacterize that as a startup because they were going to come in and rebrand the whole thing and make some capital investments in the building and all that kind of stuff. And so they actually were able to do a loan as a startup, even though it was an existing preschool. But they just treat it like a startup, and it really kind of, for all practical purposes, was.
yeah.
It was an interesting way to characterize a very underperforming preschool into a deal.
How do buyers find preschools?
Well, they
I
work
mean, I
with
know,
amazing Sunbelt Business Brokers, of course.
right. So providing some context to the question is there's on market and off market deals. On market is generally sold by a business broker, M&A advisor, boutique investment bank, whatever you want to call them. But the listing, the company is being sold to the public, generally under like a non-disclosing headline. Then there's off market, which is when the buyer either hires a buy-side advisor, buy-side broker, or the buyer goes directly to the business owner and asks them, pretty much, do you want to sell your business? I see a bunch of different ways people going about it, but I guess like you're probably going to say the best way to buy a preschool is to go to the
Right,
Sunbelt Houston
right.
office.
Hey, in my inbox at the schools, that I still check every now and then, big mound of mail, a third of it is exactly what you're talking about. People that say they specialize in doing that or whatnot. I don't know how successful they are in finding that for their clients, or if it's really just outreach to bring it into an on market thing, or what's going on there. So I don't know. I don't have experience with if it's worked or not, but I sure certainly get a lot of marketing about it.
Yeah. From your experience selling businesses, when you do have this broker, buyer, owner meeting, what are like successful buyers doing to establish rapport, developing a relationship, and really pushing that transaction forward so the owner and the broker think like, this buyer, I want to buy the business?
Sure. This is kind of generic, maybe more of a generic question too, or a generic answer, I guess, because it's
Yeah.
kind of similar advice I'd give to any buyer going in there is to, ask questions and be curious and kind of, and hopefully the brokers kind of I try to give my buyers a little bit of heads up on, hey, this is important to this person, so it would behoove you to address this in our meeting, but, ask them about the deal. They love to tell you about their business, ask them what they would do if they were you, just all those things. And especially in the preschool space, just because of the stereotypical people that are in it, there's a lot of warm and fuzzy and I like you and don't like you kind of thing, so you want to be nice and learn about their business. And a lot of individual owner operator, maybe founders of preschools, they're not necessarily numbers and cents kind of people, so you can't really go down that conversation maybe directly with them either. I mean, you want to talk about, why they love the kids and what's been great about the business and all those kinds of things. Because as a buyer, I mean, you want to make sure it's something you want to get into, right? So you want to come out of that conversation and be like, that sounds awesome. It's something I want to do and it's meaningful and impactful. But you want to impress that you feel that way upon the seller as well. So I would say stay away from as many numbers as you can, ask the broker and talk about, the fun stuff at a preschool.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that, it sounds like what you're saying is you're learning about the industry and then the specific company. So industry
Mhm,
comes first, then the specific company.
mhm,
If a
mhm.
buyer wanted to go to like a daycare conference or some sort of location where a lot of like that industry meets, is there
Mm.
daycare like conferences? I know I'm kind of pulling this one out the side of the hat,
Yeah,
but
no, that's interesting. It's been a while since I've been active in the business. I know they go do CE stuff, and there's
yeah.
like Tim the trainer does a cruise, where you can get all your CEs on the cruise, and we did that once, and it was a lot of fun, and we learned a lot of stuff too. And I know we went to one conference. This is back when I was probably almost 20 years ago, right? And I was one of the only males in the George R. Brown Convention Center, right? So they took over all the men's bathrooms and all the things, right? So, but that wasn't just owners; it was kind of everybody, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some national organizations and some accreditation organizations. I'm just, a lot of it kind of depends on where you are with your school on how you want to kind of promote yourself within the industry on, did I get this accreditation or am I recognized as this type of preschool or kind of those different kinds of things. So yes, I don't know if they take on just kind of people that maybe aren't already in the industry, but
Yeah.
probably.
Probably depends on where you are regionally too, because there's different
Yeah,
accreditation
yeah.
across the
There are a
country.
couple of national organizations though that I'm sure, you could probably participate in somehow or another.
All right. So a buyer goes through this like initial screening process with you and the business owner for a daycare. And they say, I want to move forward with this business. An LOI is letter of intent is executed. The buyer is under due diligence here. How have you seen successful buyers acquire daycare, like do their due diligence?
I mean, you want to collect all your things, and if you're working with a bank, of course, I always think they're a great source of a due diligence partner because they're definitely going to kind of say, "Hey, we need all this stuff," right?
Mhm.
I don't think you don't necessarily need a quality of earnings kind of thing, but I would definitely ask for bank statements and match them up with the either deposit reports or tuition items or those kinds of things, just to make sure there's not money kind of flowing around in some places that may not be readily available. That's the kind, when it's a broker led deal, a lot of times we should have done some of that homework. You shouldn't have to worry about that. But that's some things I would recommend doing and asking for just to, stress test those items just to make sure that cash and enrollment's actually there. I think more and more preschools are moving to, childcare management software. And so you're just going to get a lot more, a lot better data faster kind of report wise than maybe even, 10 years ago, you were getting handwritten attendance logs and things like that. And so it was a little harder to piece things together. Whereas now I think it kind of all ties into the accounting system and some of those kinds of things. So that's one big question is what software do you use, kind of thing. And that could tell you a lot right away.
And I think you said you might have had a story about like cross-checking bank statements where maybe there was
Yeah, we bought one time and we just kind of everybody liked each other and we all trusted each other and that kind of thing. And we never went back and did a forensic, look back at it. But when we got there and kind of started wandering around, it was like these enrollment sheets don't match with the number of kids that are here today.
yeah.
So that was kind of our horror story of like, oh, so we're going to be, $30,000 a month short.
It
So
really
that
seems like one of the North Stars here that you keep bringing up is attendance. And obviously attendance leads to revenue.
hmm
Plowing through that is a good place to start. I guess, are there state inspection reports or like safety violations that they can check? Because I'm
Yeah.
assuming if a daycare trips one of these, it's like worse than a 3-star Google review.
And people don't seem to even, I mean, people, I say people like parents enrolling their kids don't seem to look at that stuff up either, which is amazing to me. Texas at least has a real robust reporting system, and it's gotten more and more granular, which, good, bad, or indifferent. It's the government, right? But they're there and they're here to help. So we took years ago. I used to argue with our inspectors or licensing reps when they came in about just tons of stuff, right? Because I was offended that they found something wrong with my facilities. One person told me, she's like, "Well, you're a 12-hour a day, year-round facility. Like you'll never get 100%." And it was like, oh, challenge accepted, gauntlet thrown, right? So we started incentivizing the heck out of our staff to, hey, if we get 100%, we're doing a party and meals and gift cards and all this stuff. And so, man, we started knocking out these 100% reports where we no deficiencies on anything, right? And so that became kind of our standard. You can go look on there and you can see in some. It does a good job, at least in Texas, of saying, hey, these are kind of, paperwork errors where maybe we didn't, the childcare center didn't have the right form for somebody, or maybe they were hey, this one's red and it's really bad because X, Y, Z. And you can kind of see some information about it. Some of it's in kind of technical, jargony kind of things in the industry, but it's certainly something to look at and go, well, why don't you have 17 reports and this other school only has 2, kind of thing.
So I think that's another layer that they could do during the LOI or while they're analyzing.
Or even before, it's easy. You type in the facility name or address and it just pops up.
Okay, well, that's good. So
Breezy.
look at that, and then look at the occupancy rate, and then just follow that trail and verifying it. LOIs fall apart all the time. It's understandable. But is there any sort of commonalities you see with particularly maybe the daycare space of why deals fall apart? And then in general, why would deals fall apart?
Well, you're making the bad assumption that our deals fall apart, and I could speak to that. So I think when LOIs are go sideways in general, is when, in my opinion, and I get a lot of pushback on this, is when they don't have enough information in them and enough for the details of the deal, even at a high level. Just there's some things that maybe are no-goes for either the seller or the bank or the buyer or whoever. The broker should kind of know some of those things and, hey, we at least get this on the table now. Like if you just kick the can on it, like this stuff's all going to come out and or should. So if there's a deal killer on the table, you need to get that addressed in a hurry. Well, I thought the director was going to stay for a year, or whatever, right? And the the owner director's like, well, I'm out of here in 30 days. That's some, making up one, but there can be some stuff like that. So I always like to get as many details in an LOI as possible with lots of deadlines and milestones. That way we all are because we're all on the same team at some point about trying to get the deal closed, so we need to all have expectations set on how that works. So that's how we try to handle LOIs.
And I mean, broadly speaking, nobody can expect 100% of LOIs being accepted because these are confidential sales. And then when more information is released to the buyers, obviously things flow in and out of, their buy boxes. So that's totally understandable.
Well, and a lot of times something may fall apart, like the license issue, right? So maybe somebody's coming into a deal and they have a partner who's going to be the license holder, and then something totally unrelated to the deal happens to that relationship during diligence. Well, then the deal falls apart through kind of nobody's fault, dependent kind of thing. So there's some things like that. There's when we get a contract signed, we're excited, but we're only 1 inch closer to the finish line.
Okay. So you've convinced me to buy a daycare. I'm through LOI phase here. And I'm buying this daycare, signed purchase agreement. What should I be worried about as a buyer of this daycare, acquirer of this daycare on day one?
Gotcha. Well, you're probably going to have some of the same. I always think it's funny because usually the buyer and seller end up being worried about the same thing, but for kind of different reasons. Like, hey, are all my customers going to leave?
Yeah.
Are all my employees going to leave? That kind of thing. And at least with us, we, only one. Actually, it was with the preschool. One time, the only time I've seen mass exodus of employees is just incident to the transaction is because a guy came in and bought a preschool, but he even told us this. He's like, hey, I'm taking away all the benefits. I'm, changing compensation. I'm doing all these things. It's like, okay. I was like, well, all the staff's going to leave, right? And he was like, yeah, that's okay. I'm changing them all. Cool. All the staff didn't leave. They still stayed. I mean, not all of them. They did have a bunch leave, but so that's how sticky, I think, especially in the preschool world, there's a lot of loyalty there to the kids and to the facility and to the team there. They kind of bond in a lot of cases. So they're not going to, and they don't, they may like the owner, but they don't love the owner. You know what I mean? So I say you wouldn't worry about that. You're probably going to bring some kind of fresh energy. You're going to maybe repaint the building. You're going to do some things that appeal to the staff, that they're going to at least going to give you a chance to screw it up. Right. So, if anything, don't be worried about it. Be focused on what you can do to provide some value and more stickiness to your team. And then for the families, also, they don't care about you as the director, in my opinion. I mean, they do, but they care about their teachers and the teacher turnover ratio and the facility, how clean it is, and what kind of food they're getting, right? So at our facilities, we spend an inordinate amount of money on cleaning and food because those are like two things when people come over from other facilities, they go, man, that place was just dirty. Or man, my kid came home hungry. And it's like, man, both those things are pretty easy to fix. There's a
Yeah.
cost to it, but so just be focused on that kind of stuff when you're buying it on, hey, what do I need to do to make sure nothing transitions? And if you keep your staff, our thoughts are always happy staff is happy kids is happy parents pay their bill, so that's the order we go through.
I think like I want to cleaning and food. Bringing this back up to due diligence here, is there a way to check that during due diligence? Like, what products are you using to clean the facility? What are you
Yeah,
feeding?
yeah. I mean, you should get a tour, right? Even if it's after hours.
Yeah.
And here's the thing: don't secret shop the childcare center you want to buy. The staff there, they can smell you a mile away. Like when we have secret shoppers from other schools or other people, they can tell. So either set it up with somebody maybe, or you even do it as the owner and walk a potential buyer through, and that way it's kind of it's on you. Or do an after hours tour and look at the the non teaching areas, the washroom and the cleaning room and the laundry room, and ask them to tell you about their food program and get the menu. The menu has to be published, at least in Texas. So you should get your menu and just check out those things and see what they're doing. That'll give you a sense of it.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, if you're buying another type of business, it's probably not asking about the food that the employee.
Right. Well, hey, somebody's got to have their food service manager's license. I sat through that class when I was a youngster.
I guess my biggest concern as acquiring this daycare now is I know parents are passionate about certain things. I would be worried about day one, the parents thinking everything's changing. I got to find a new daycare. Is that the case? Or do parents generally they're probably more loyal to the teacher than they are the owner?
That's true. But only to a degree. You hear teachers that come in to apply for a job and say, oh, I'm going to bring my whole class with me. Right. And those parents over there may love that teacher, but there's something else about that facility. Maybe it's location, the vibe, something about it draws them there. Right. And so they're going to really miss that teacher a lot, but they probably are going to move just because the teacher goes. Right. So there's a little bit of that. But yeah, I would say parents are pretty loyal to their choice in childcare. They think it's the best for a number of reasons, and they're pretty passionate about that too. They're also passionate about, when there's a perceived error or something in the
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
There's some conflict resolution skills that are necessary, but yeah, I think parents are, as long as you handle the messaging right in the transition and talk about, maybe your director's not changing, or, a lot of times if you've got somebody that's the owner founder and they've been there for, 30 some odd years, well, like, that's not a surprise to anybody. It's usually like, oh man, that's so amazing. We're so glad, you deserve it. And this has been such a wonderful place. And you get that chance to go. And this new person that's going to take over is also loving and amazing and all these things. They're going to do all these wonderful things for your family and your child and the future of whatever school it is. Right. So I think if you position it right and follow through with those things, you're not going to scare anybody off by that kind of talk.
Okay. So I bought the daycare. I've been in charge of this daycare for 3 months, 90 days now. You're my consultant here on trying to analyze my numbers. Are there anything that daycare business buyers should be looking for of like ways they can enhance the margins of the business? So I'm going to provide an example, and obviously this is not a daycare business, but we talked to somebody who was like doing a lot of shipping. They were shipping their products, and it was a large product. And if they rescaled the size of their boxes, then they could save like $130 per box. And overall, this increased their margins, whatever, like 3%. I'm curious if there's something like this in the daycares that you could maybe look for as a daycare buyer to be like, oh, I know if I bought the daycare and I did this one thing, I would be able to increase the margins of the business.
Sure, and kind of to your point earlier, capacity is one lever that you can't change, and so you can change that just base tuition rate lever to a degree, and then everything else is kind of below that, and it's real hard to squeeze any more expenses without suffering quality. So I think what you're saying is pretty spot on, and if you've got, and that's where you scale again, right? Doing something for $5 a month per kid for 40 kids is a lot different than doing it for 200 kids, and it kind of adds up over time. So some places where, and this is just going to be some arguments maybe, or some differing in opinions on models a lot of times too. On the expense side, it's the staffing, right? If you watch your ratios and kind of pay attention to that and kind of manage your classrooms and really keep a fine line on your payable hours for wages. That's, your first or second, biggest item on your expense sides. There's that, your staffing, just hours, right? But as far as generating more revenue and margin, and I've seen the industry kind of wiggle back and forth on some of these things. Like sometimes it's, hey, if you want access to the cameras, then you got to pay $25 a month. So if you don't want them, great. So, but then there's also the whole, hey, why don't you just increase tuition for everybody by $25 a month and then just give access to everybody? And so it's one of those things, you make it inclusive or break it out. Back when we first got in the business, if you had third parties coming in for like a PE supplemental program or something like that, you had to write your checks. So you would go in and write these little boxes, and you'd write 4 different checks for all the little extra programs your kid went to. Or is it, do you just increase tuition by $50 a month? And hey, look at our great preschool, all this stuff's included. And it goes back to that, well, now did you just price some people out that maybe didn't want that stuff? Or maybe they picked their kid up at 3 and they're not participating in it anyway. So there's little things you can do, but it's going to be in response to your community and maybe the competition in the area as well.
Couple quick hitters to close out on. Is there something surprising about daycares that outsiders don't know? And you just said one right now, like cameras. Parents have access to potentially cameras, right? Like, that's wild.
That's a huge debate, right? That's a huge debate inside the industry. I was terrified of it when we first did it, just because it's like, man, and sure enough, because our system kicks people off after 45 minutes, I think. And so parents, how do I extend that? I got a whole separate, monitor at work to watch my kid all day. All this stuff. And it has been fantastic, right? Because you really get to at least for us, you can collaborate with those families and parents and see what's going on in the classroom and talk about it, and then, or if there is some kind of, hey, like what's going on here, you can go back and review it with them, or they've reviewed it themselves. We've had some incidents where, we had a child had a reaction to something, and the paramedics were able to watch the camera and kind of figure out what was going on right before that as to kind of why she had that reaction. So, she's being transported to the hospital. They've got somebody watching that screen, and it was valuable information to be able to relay ahead of, hey, here's what was going on. It wasn't anything bad, just, just kind of got a sense of what the activity was. So it's really been a great experience for the cameras. But too much about cameras, but credit cards, like lots of preschools don't have credit cards because of the processing fees, right? So, well, do you pass those fees through? Do you not? Do you not take credit cards? Do you take checks? Now you got to chase people down for money. Parents want to pay, that's the only check people are writing anymore is to their preschool. So if you go to monthly, credit cards, your parents are probably going to go, thank goodness, or twice a month or whatever it is. So that's something as well. And also there's another kind of revenue, not necessarily revenue maker for you, but if you charge a fee for that, if you can. I know some states have different laws on all this fun stuff.
H2, there's a lot of different solutions out there. that probably goes into too of like, I didn't know this too. There's another surprising thing. There's daycare software, assuming that they can obtain payments and probably be flexible with ACHs and things like that. Okay. Now, one piece of advice maybe for someone like me who's just bought a daycare. What piece of advice do you have with people who want to buy daycares or who just bought daycares?
Start making plans to buy your next daycare.
Start making plans to buy your next daycare.
Or to expand your brand, right? If you have a growth, if you're not doing the whole, hey, I just want to buy this job and do this and I love it. The only way to scale is to add more square foot. And I don't mean add on to your building, which I guess you could, but you need to start identifying another location or another target acquisition and those kinds of things to really grow. Because, the acquisition process takes, 4, 6, 8 months, even if you have a target. So if you want to do a deal a year, you got to be always working on the next deal.
Boiler room right here. ABC. All right, Dan, really appreciate it. Before we end it, where can people find you if they want to contact you to buy your daycare?
So our preschools are called theyounglearners.com, right? Theyounglearners.com, you'll find that. We also have a clinic for young children with autism. That's really an amazing program that we actually acquired that business through Sunbelt Business Brokers, and it's been fantastic, and that's a cool story too. But me personally, I'm Dan Altom at Sunbelt Business Brokers of Texas. Sunbelttexas.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, all the fun stuff. Dan Altom, ALTOM.
Perfect. Appreciate the time, Dan.
Thanks, George. Always a pleasure.